The Zethani pride themselves on three things: their crystalline neural matrices that process information 17 times faster than carbon-based brains, their 12,000-year head start on faster-than-light travel, and their absolutely unshakable conviction that they know better than everyone else in the galaxy. 2 out of 3 isn't bad, but that last one gets people killed. Commander Vane stood at the observation deck of the stealth vessel Diplomatic Courtesy, a name that roughly translated to, "We're here and you can't do anything about it," and watched the blue-green marble of Earth rotate beneath him. Primitive, charming in its own way, like watching children play with blocks. The planet had barely crawled out of its own atmosphere a century ago, still burning petrochemicals like savages, still dividing themselves along lines of geography and melanin concentration. "Adorable, really." "Status report," Vane said, his translator converting his harmonic frequencies into something approximating authority. His exoskeleton gleamed under the ship's ambient lighting, each segmented plate a masterwork of bioengineered armor that could withstand plasma fire. He'd never needed it, of course. Diplomats didn't see combat. They certainly didn't see combat on pre-contact worlds populated by beings who still used projectile weapons. The tactical officer, a Grenthix named Holm, whose species had been conquering their enemies through superior logistics for 6 millennia, pulled up the holographic display. The weapons platform crashed approximately 47 hours ago, in the northern wilderness region designated Pacific Northwest. Remote location, minimal human presence. Automated distress beacon ceased transmission after initial impact, suggesting structural damage to primary system. Life signs: the bioweapons remain in stasis. Containment appears intact. Holmes' auxiliary limbs twitched, nervousness, which was concerning coming from a species that had literally evolved past the fear response. However, there is a complication. Vane's optical sensors narrowed. In his experience, complications on pre-contact worlds usually meant someone saw something glowing fall from the sky and went to investigate. Curiosity, the universal constant that transcended species boundaries and common sense in equal measure. Define complication. The hologram shifted, showing a thermal signature moving through the crash site perimeter. Humanoid, alone, poking around the wreckage like someone inspecting a suspicious package on their doorstep. A human discovered the site approximately 6 hours ago. Female, based on thermal distribution patterns. She has established a camp within 50 meters of the platform and appears to be examining the exterior hull. Vane felt something that his species' emotional suppression training couldn't quite eliminate, a mixture of amusement and condescension that the Zethani reserved for watching lesser species attempt to comprehend technology beyond their capability. A human looking at a weapons platform that represented the cutting edge of xenobiology and temporal engineering. It was like watching an amoeba contemplate quantum physics. One human, unarmed, presumably ignorant of what she's found. Vane checked the mission chronometer. They had 18 hours before the platform's fail-safes degraded enough to risk containment breach. 18 hours before things that had been specifically designed to end civilizations might wake up on a planet full of beings who thought nuclear weapons were the height of destructive capability. Extraction team, you're authorized for deployment. Bring environmental hazard gear and memory suppressors. We retrieve the platform, we sanitize the witness, we leave. Standard first contact containment protocol. The extraction team assembled in the deployment bay, with the efficient precision of professionals who had done this exact operation on 43 different worlds. Holm led the 5-person unit, HIMS-2 Vrin combat engineers, whose species had been building impregnable structures, since humans were figuring out that stacking rocks was easier than carrying them. A phosphine medical specialist, who could induce selective amnesia with a thought, and an Ultrani observer, whose sole job was to ensure nobody violated the collective's prohibitions on interfering with developing species, which was ironic, considering the entire mission was one giant interference. But the Galactic Collective had always been good at semantic gymnastics when it suited their purposes. They descended through Earth's atmosphere in a dropship that bent light around its hull like water flowing around a stone, invisible, silent, superior. The forest below sprawled in all directions, dense canopy broken only by the ugly scar of the crash site, burned trees, scorched earth, and at the center, the weapons platform itself. Roughly the size of a human dwelling, its adaptive camouflage had partially engaged, making it blend with the surrounding devastation in a way that looked almost natural. Almost. The humans' camp sat just outside the primary debris, a simple shelter constructed from local materials. A small fire that spoke to either ignorance of thermal detection or complete lack of concern about being found, and various tools laid out with surprising organization. The woman herself stood at the platform's main access panel, which should have been completely sealed and undetectable to pre-industrial species. Should have. She's attempting to interface with the access port, one of the Vrian engineers reported, his voice carrying the kind of disbelief usually reserved for discovering that gravity had stopped working. That panel shouldn't even be visible without a quantum scan. Humans have quantum scanners, the Ultrani observer asked. His academic interest piqued. Humans have barely functional space telescopes. Vane replied. She probably found a seam in the hull and thinks she's discovered some kind of military satellite. We'll correct her assumptions before we correct her memories. They landed 50 meters from her position, the dropship settling onto the forest floor with a whisper of displaced air. The extraction team deployed in textbook formation, weapons lowered but ready, medical equipment prepared, containment fields charged. Everything by protocol. Everything professional. The woman turned around as they approached. That should have been Vane's first clue that something was wrong. She'd heard them. Or seen them. Or somehow sensed 5 armored aliens and their commander emerging from a vessel that was specifically designed to be imperceptible to human senses. She stood there, maybe 5.5 feet tall, practically microscopic by Zikthani standards, covered in local dirt and plant matter, holding some kind of primitive multi-tool that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and wishful thinking. She looked directly at Vane, then at each member of the extraction team. Her eyes, those strange mobile eyes that marked humans as predators on their own world, assessed them with an expression that Vane's cultural database unhelpfully labeled as unimpressed. Took you long enough, she said. The translator worked perfectly, rendering her language into something the collective species could understand. It was the content that caused problems. You were expecting us? Vane asked, his harmonics rising into frequencies that indicated confusion. The phosphine medical specialist's bioluminescent patches flickered. She was scanning the human for signs of psychological trauma or hallucinogenic plant exposure. Both would explain a lot. Your ship crashed 2 days ago, made noise like the sky was tearing open, left a trail you could see from orbit, if you know what to look for. And before you ask, yes, I know what to look for. She gestured at the weapons platform with her improvised tool. This thing's been pinging out radio signals on frequencies that don't exist in nature. Intermittent, encrypted, but definitely artificial. So either aliens, or my government's doing something very illegal in my backyard. I was betting aliens. The extraction team exchanged glances that didn't require translation. This was not standard first contact behavior. Standard first contact behavior involved fear, religious ecstasy, or immediate attempts at communication followed by existential crisis. This human was discussing radio frequency analysis like she was commenting on the weather. You are not alarmed by our presence? Holm asked, his logistical mind already recalculating the mission parameters. Oh, I'm alarmed. I'm just not showing it because terror makes you stupid, and I'm betting you need stupid right now. She pointed at the weapons platform. That thing is dangerous. The exterior's cold, but the core's running a thermal cycle that's getting shorter every hour. Whatever's inside wants out, and based on how carefully you're all moving around it, you already know that. Vane felt his confidence, that beautiful, arrogant certainty that came from representing a civilization that had mastered entropy itself, develop its first hairline crack. This was going to be more complicated than anticipated. The phosphine medical specialist's bioluminescent patches flashed in patterns that roughly translated to cognitive function nominal, threat assessment accurate, subject demonstrates advanced analytical reasoning. In other words, the human wasn't crazy, wasn't drugged, and had figured out more in 2 days than most pre-contact species managed in their entire first decade of exposure to extraterrestrial technology. Veen recalibrated his approach when dealing with intelligent primitives. And yes, he heard the contradiction in that phrase. The standard procedure involved gentle condescension followed by memory suppression. But something about the way this woman stood there, tool in hand, dirt on her boots, watching them with the patience of someone who'd already run through this conversation in her head, suggested that standard procedures were about to become wildly insufficient. "We appreciate your cooperation," Veen began, his translator smoothing his harmonics into something approximating human friendliness. "However, this situation involves technology and biological hazards that your species lacks the context to properly save it." She interrupted him, actually interrupted a Zethany commander mid-diplomatic platitude, which was either breathtakingly rude or refreshingly efficient, depending on one's perspective. "You're here to retrieve your weapon before it turns my planet into a horror show." "I'm here because this is my land, and I'd rather not have my morning coffee interrupted by an alien apocalypse. We have compatible goals, so let's skip the part where you pat me on the head and tell me to run along because that panel there," she pointed at the access port she'd been examining. "I've already mapped 3 different entry sequences. 2 would probably kill me. 1 might work, and I'm about 4 hours from being desperate enough to try it." The 2 Vren engineers exchanged a look that conveyed several thousand years of architectural philosophy, collapsing into bewilderment. One of them, whose designation translated roughly to Boulder who thinks, stepped forward. "You mapped entry sequences on a temporal-locked quantum interface. With what, exactly?" She held up her primitive multi-tool. "This, a shortwave radio, a solar battery charger, and basic pattern recognition. Your lock cycles through 6 different electromagnetic states, on a 4.7-second rotation. It's actually not that complicated once you adjust for the fact that it's operating in more dimensions than I can see." "How do you know about dimensional layering?" the Ultrani observer blurted, his academic composure finally cracking. His entire species had built their reputation on theoretical physics, and this human was casually discussing concepts that should have been completely alien to her civilization's understanding. I'm guessing, but I used to work in signal encryption before I got tired of my government lying to people for a living." She shrugged, a gesture that the translator interpreted as dismissive acceptance. "Figured I'd spend my retirement somewhere quiet." "Then your ship dropped into my forest, and apparently the universe has a sense of humor." Former military engineer, former signals intelligence, current wilderness survivalist, with a functioning understanding of advanced physics, and the audacity to poke at alien technology with improvised tools. Veen's threat assessment protocols, designed by beings who'd been evaluating potential dangers for 12 millennia, suddenly started screaming warnings that he'd spent the last 5 minutes ignoring. "Ma'am," Holmes said, his tactical processing finally catching up to the reality of the situation, "we need you to step away from the platform. The biological weapons inside are designed to adapt to local ecosystems and systematically dismantle dominant species through accelerated evolution and directed mutation." She said it like she was reading a grocery list. "Yeah, I figured that out around hour 3. The organic residue on the exterior hull shows marker proteins that don't match anything in Earth's evolutionary tree, and the thermal patterns suggest something alive in stasis. Military background, remember? I know what a weapon looks like, even when it's wearing a fancy alien chassis." The woman walked toward them, and every member of the extraction team instinctively shifted their stance. Not threatening, just aware, the way predators become aware when another predator enters their territory. "Here's what's going to happen," she continued, her tone shifting from analytical to something harder. "You're going to open that platform. You're going to secure whatever nightmare you've been carting around the galaxy. And I'm going to help you, because I have tools and knowledge of the local environment that you don't. Then we're going to have a conversation about why the hell you're flying weapons of mass extinction through inhabited star systems. We don't require assistance from the start." The platform's hull emitted a sound, low, harmonic, wrong, the kind of sound that vibrated in frequencies designed to trigger fear responses across multiple species simultaneously. Everyone froze, even the woman, though she recovered faster than the aliens who'd actually built the thing making the noise. "It's accelerating,"
she said quietly. That thermal cycle I mentioned, it just shortened by 40 minutes. Whatever's inside is waking up ahead of schedule. Holm pulled up his portable scanner, and his logistics-oriented brain performed calculations that made his species famous across 3 sectors. Containment failure in 9 hours. Possibly less if the bioweapons detect viable targets in proximity. They already do, the woman said. I've been here for 6 hours. My biosignature's been soaking into the hull the entire time. If those things are designed to hunt, they know something edible is near. The phosphine medical specialist, whose entire purpose involved maintaining cognitive health, made a sound that her species reserved for watching patients develop conditions beyond treatment. She's correct. The platform's external sensors are rudimentary but functional. It's been cataloging local biology since impact, including her. Veen felt the second crack appear in his confidence, wider this time. The mission was simple: retrieve the platform, suppress the witness. But the witness had just made herself operationally essential, while simultaneously demonstrating that memory suppression would only work if they could catch her, and based on how she'd evaded detection for 6 hours, while actively investigating alien technology, catching her was becoming a dubious proposition. You could have run, the Ultrani observer said, genuine curiosity overriding his usual academic detachment. You detected something dangerous and unknown. Why didn't you leave? The woman's expression shifted into something that made Veen's threat assessment protocols start composing elegies. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was the look of someone who'd made a decision, and was now committed to seeing it through regardless of cost. Because this is my home, and I'm tired of people, human or otherwise, thinking they can do whatever they want just because they've got bigger guns and fancier ships. She turned back toward the platform. Now are we doing this, or are you planning to stand around discussing your feelings until that thing hatches? Veen made a decision that his superiors would later describe as either brilliantly adaptive or catastrophically stupid. Holm, integrate her into the extraction protocol. Boulder, who thinks, work with her on the access sequences. Everyone else prepare containment equipment. We have 9 hours. Commander, regulations clearly state, the Ultrani observer began. Regulations were written by people who weren't standing next to a weapons platform, about to turn a developing world into an evolutionary nightmare. I'll take the censure if we survive. Veen moved toward the platform, his exoskeleton's armor plates shifting to accommodate movement. Ma'am, I don't suppose you have a name you'd be willing to share. I have several. You can use the one that matters. The person currently standing between you and complete mission failure. She pulled out a small notebook, actual paper, which showed how primitive Earth still was, filled with handwritten calculations and diagrams. Now let's see if your engineers are as smart as their armor makes them look. Boulder, who thinks, examined her notes, and made a sound that his translator rendered as profound existential uncertainty. She's actually correct about the entry sequences. Because, the woman said, already moving back toward the access panel, when you spend enough time looking at patterns, you realize the universe doesn't care how advanced you are. Physics is physics, engineering is engineering, and locks are locks. Yours are just shinier. The weapons platform pulsed again, and this time the sound carried harmonics that made everyone's threat responses spikes. Something inside was definitely waking up, something that had been designed by species who understood that the best weapons didn't just kill, they evolved, adapted, and kept killing long after the battle was over. The extraction team moved into position around the platform, and the woman slid between them like she'd trained with alien tactical formations her entire life. She hadn't, of course. She was just adaptable enough to recognize efficiency when she saw it, and smart enough to not get in the way of professionals doing their jobs, even if those professionals were beginning to suspect that the most dangerous thing in this forest wasn't the weapon behind the locked. It was the human with dirt on her boots and spite in her eyes standing right next to them.
The access panel responded to Boulder, who thinks, quantum key like a lock that had been waiting 12,000 years for someone to ask nicely. Layers of protective plating retracted with mechanical precision that would have been beautiful if it weren't revealing something that made biological warfare look quaint by comparison. The interior glowed with bioluminescent markers that pulsed in rhythm with something alive, something waiting, something very much aware that its containment was being compromised. Stasis field integrity at 62%, Holm reported, his tactical mind already running failure scenarios. We have maybe 4 hours before primary containment collapses. Then we work fast. The woman leaned into the opening, her portable light illuminating chambers that resembled a cross between a laboratory and an abattoir. Organic material lined the walls, not decoration but functional tissue that processed environmental data and fed it to the specimens inside. Your bioweapons are networked. They're sharing information even in stasis. How could you possibly, the second Vrin engineer, start the tissue patterns? They're identical to distributed neural networks, just organic instead of digital. Whatever's in those pods isn't just individual weapons. It's a collective intelligence. She pointed at the pulsing connections between containment chambers, which means when one wakes up, they all wake up. And they'll already know everything about this environment that the hull sensors collected. The phosphine medical specialist's bioluminescence flickered through colors that indicated professional distress. She's correct. These specimens were designed for coordinated deployment. They hunt as a networked system, adapting strategies in real time across the entire population. Fantastic, the woman muttered. Alien murder hornets with a hive mind. Just what my retirement needed. A sound erupted from the deepest chamber, organic, wet, and utterly wrong. One of the containment pods was failing faster than the others, its transparent surface fogging with condensation as whatever resided inside began metabolic processes that had been suspended since before humans invented agriculture. We need to reinforce the stasis fields now, then ordered, his harmonics pitching into command frequencies that made even his own species snap to attention. You can't. The woman was already moving deeper into the platform, her primitive light casting shadows that made the organic walls look like they were breathing. The fields are degrading from the inside out. Whatever's in there is consciously disrupting them. It's been awake longer than you Impossible. Our sensors would have viewed. The failing pod exploded outward with enough force to spray the interior chamber with fluid that smelled like ozone, and decomposition had a particularly ugly child. What emerged defied comfortable categorization. Roughly humanoid in shape because that form factor worked well for hunting bipedal prey, but covered in adaptive plating that shifted between states of matter like it couldn't decide whether being solid was really necessary. Its sensory organs, too many of them, placed at angles that suggested it perceived reality in dimensions humans and most collective species couldn't access, locked onto the nearest target, which happened to be the woman, because the universe maintains a sense of irony even during apocalyptic scenarios. The creature lunged with speed that made mockery of physics, closing 3 meters in the time it took Ven to register movement. It should have begun the efficient dismantling process it had been designed for, starting with cognitive functions and working down through vital systems. Should have. The woman moved sideways, her primitive multi-tool came up and jammed directly into the creature's primary sensory cluster, with the kind of precision that suggested she'd been studying its anatomy through the containment pod and had identified weak points that the designers probably thought were theoretical. The tool discharged. She'd apparently rigged her solar battery charger into a makeshift electrical weapon, and the creature convulsed as current disrupted its networked consciousness connection. "Shoot it," she yelled, rolling away as the thing thrashed. Now, while it's disconnected, the extraction team, to their credit, overcame their shock fast enough to be professional. Plasma fire converged on the creature from 3 angles, and whatever exotic matter composed its body decided that existing in this particular configuration of space-time was no longer viable. It collapsed into component molecules with a sound like disappointed thunder. Silence, heavy, profound, the kind of silence that follows when everyone realizes that the carefully planned operation has officially become improvisation and violent. "There are 7 more pods," Holmes said quietly, checking his scanner. "The network knows we killed one. They're accelerating the wake cycle. Then we can't kill them." The woman was already examining the neural tissue connecting the pods, her analytical mind working through problems while everyone else was still processing the fact that she'd just stabbed an alien bioweapon with a homemade taser. Killing them triggers defensive responses in the network. We need to put them back to sleep. With what? The phosphine medical specialist asked. The stasis system is failing. We don't have equipment to generate new containment fields strong enough for active specimens. You do, actually. She pointed at the organic neural network. This tissue processes environmental data, right? It's reading everything: atmospheric composition, temperature, local biology, threat assessment. It's feeding that information to the specimens to help them adapt. Yes, Boulder, who thinks, was following her logic but couldn't see the destination. So we feed it bad data, make the specimens think the environment outside is immediately lethal. They're designed for survival above all else. That's what makes them effective weapons. If their networked intelligence calculates that remaining in stasis is safer than waking up, they'll shut themselves down. Then felt something that 12,000 years of Zikthani superiority had never quite prepared him for: genuine admiration for a being his civilization had catalogued as primitive. That might work, but we'd need to inject false data directly into the neural network. The tissue would reject foreign interfaces. It would reject your interfaces. Alien technology, alien biochemistry. The network knows you're not part of its design parameters. She held up her hand. Very human. Very much local biology that the platform had been studying for hours. But I'm exactly what it's calibrated to analyze. It's been reading my biosignature since I got here. It thinks I'm environmental data. Absolutely not, the Ultrani observer said, his academic detachment finally breaking. You're suggesting direct neural interface with a weapons platform designed by species whose understanding of biology makes our best medical technology look like ritualized bloodletting. The cognitive damage alone would be a problem if I planned to let it access my actual nervous system. She was already pulling apart her equipment, jury-rigging components in ways that suggested her engineering background had involved a lot of improvisation and very little concern for manufacturer warranties. I'm going to fake the connection, give it electrical signals that mimic neural activity, but feed it the environmental data we need it to believe. Another pod began failing, its occupants stirring with movements that suggested intelligence and malice in equal measure. We're out of time and options. Then said, what do you need? Your medical specialist's bioelectric scanner, their translation device, and everyone to shut up for about 90 seconds, while I convince a networked alien intelligence that the world outside is full of acid rain and neurotoxins. The phosphine specialist handed over equipment worth more than most planetary economies, while making sounds that indicated profound medical ethics violation. The woman integrated the devices into her improvised setup, with the kind of speed that suggested she'd done this exact type of thing before, just with different alien technology, and presumably lower stakes. She pressed her jury-rigged interface against the neural tissue. Her entire body went rigid as the connection established, electrical current flowing in patterns that mimicked thought, while carefully avoiding actual cognitive exchange. The tissue pulsed, accepting the data, feeding it through the network to the waking specimens. The pods began to stabilize. Whatever calculations the networked intelligence was running, it had decided that immediate wakefulness was strategically inadvisable. The stasis fields, no longer being actively disrupted from within, began regenerating from backup power systems. The woman disconnected and collapsed against the platform wall, breathing hard. That was significantly more unpleasant than I anticipated. You interfaced with a weapons system that has ended civilizations, the phosphine specialist said, scanning her for cognitive damage. Unpleasant is not the word I would use. Suicidally reckless, perhaps. Breathtakingly stupid, definitely, and yet effective. Holm noted, watching the containment readings return to safe parameters. The specimens are returning to full stasis. The network has accepted the environmental threat assessment. Then looked at the human woman sitting on the floor of an alien weapons platform, covered in substances that medical science would need new categories to classify, having just saved both the mission and potentially her entire planet through improvisation and his 12,000-year-old civilization's certainty about humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy was developing cracks that would require some very uncomfortable reports to explain. We need to extract the platform immediately, he said, before the specimens realize they've been deceived. About that, the woman said, still catching her breath. We should probably talk about what happens next, because I've got evidence of your species,
your technology, and your weapons platform all over my land, and unlike the murder hornets, I'm not nearly as easy to put back to sleep. The fourth crack appeared in Vin's confidence, and this one felt like it might bring the whole structure down. The platform lifted off with the grace of technology that had forgotten more about physics than Earth scientists had yet discovered, contained safely within the extraction team's cargo hold. The woman stood outside her rebuilt campfire, watching the dropship's cloaking field shimmer against the dawn sky like heat rising from pavement, and then realized with uncomfortable clarity that the hardest part of this mission wasn't the retrieval. It was standing here, trying to negotiate with someone who held every tactical advantage despite having none of the actual power. Standard protocol, the Ultrani observer said quietly, his academic mind already composing the incident report, requires memory suppression and site sanitization. We leave no evidence of contact with pre-eligible civilizations. Standard protocol also prohibits flying weapons platforms through inhabited systems, the woman replied, pouring herself coffee from a battered metal pot like they were discussing weather patterns instead of interstellar law. Yet here we are, breaking rules together. Feels like the start of a beautiful friendship. Vin's translator struggled with the sarcasm. You understand, we cannot simply leave this situation unresolved. The Galactic Collective has specific policies. Regarding policies, I now have documented proof you've violated. She gestured at her equipment, scattered around the camp with deliberate casualness. Radio recordings of your ship's transmission. Soil samples contaminated with exotic matter from your platform. Tissue samples from the creature we killed. And about 6 hours of video showing aliens running around my forest, trying not to. All backed up to 3 separate locations, time-stamped and configured to automatically transmit to several very curious researchers. If I don't check in regularly. The extraction team exchanged looks that didn't require translation. They'd been outmaneuvered by someone using equipment that belonged in a technology museum, and the sheer audacity of it commanded a respect that 12,000 years of advancement couldn't diminish. What do you want? Holm asked, his tactical mind recognizing negotiation when simple solutions had evaporated. Transparency, not full disclosure. I'm not stupid enough to think humanity's ready for the galaxy, and I'm definitely sure the galaxy isn't ready for humanity. She sipped her coffee, and then found himself genuinely curious what the primitive stimulant tasted like. But your collective is flying weapons through our system. If that's happening, we deserve to know. We deserve a chance to prepare, or at least to be informed that we're living in someone else's shooting gallery. The collective doesn't negotiate with pre-contact species, the Ultrani observer said, though his tone suggested he was reciting doctrine rather than defending it. Then I guess this will be a fascinating precedent for your paperwork. She set down her coffee and met Vin's optical sensors with the kind of direct eye contact that predators use to establish dominance. Here's my offer. You report this incident accurate. No sanitizing, no downplaying the threat your weapons pose to my planet, and no convenient omissions about how a primitive human had to save your mission. You recommend oversight changes for hazardous cargo routes, and in exchange, my evidence stays private, and if we Vin asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it, then every government on this planet learns that aliens exist, that you've been violating our space, and that your advanced civilization nearly caused an extinction event through sheer carelessness. Your collective's first contact with humanity becomes a diplomatic nightmare, instead of a carefully controlled introduction. She smiled, and it was the expression of someone who'd already won, and was being gracious about it. I'm giving you the chance to maintain control of the narrative. That's worth more than memory suppression. The phosphine medical specialist's bioluminescence cycled through patterns that indicated grudging respect. She's leveraging our need for operational security against our own protocols. It's actually it's blackmail, the Ultrani observer corrected. It's negotiation, the woman countered. Blackmail would be me demanding technology, wealth, or personal favors. I'm asking for accountability and basic respect. If that's too much for your collective, then maybe the problem isn't with my species. Vin ran calculations through his crystalline neural matrix, processing scenarios and outcomes at speeds that would make quantum computers jealous. Every option led to the same conclusion. This human had checkmated them using nothing but preparation, documentation, and absolute conviction. "I'll submit the report," he said finally. "Unedited. Command won't be pleased, but accuracy serves long-term interests better than comfortable lies." "They're going to hate it," Holm added cheerfully. "We'll probably face sanctions, definitely reassignment. Worth it," Boulder Who Thinks said, his architectural mind already appreciating the structural integrity of the woman's strategy. "This is better than another 1,000 successful routine operations." The woman nodded, something like satisfaction crossing her features. "Good. Now get your weapons platform out of my forest before something else wakes up. And maybe consider that the next time your collective needs to transport apocalypse machines, you route them around planets where people might object to being collateral damage." The extraction team began boarding the dropship, and Vian paused at the ramp. "For what it's worth, your species shows remarkable potential. When formal contact occurs, I suspect the galaxy will find humanity challenging. We're good at challenging. We've had a lot of practice." She raised her coffee in mock salute. "Safe travels, Commander. Try not to drop any more nightmares on inhabited worlds." The dropship lifted off, cloaking field engaged, leaving behind a campsite that showed evidence of occupation, but nothing that would conclusively prove alien contact. The woman watched them disappear into the morning sky, then pulled out a small device that definitely wasn't standard Earth technology, a souvenir from the platform's access panel that she'd quietly pocketed during the crisis. She smiled, examining the device that would take Earth scientists decades to understand. "Not ready for the galaxy, right?" Aboard the diplomatic courtesy, Vian composed his report, with meticulous accuracy, knowing each word would cause ripples through the collective's bureaucracy. Command would dismiss his threat assessment. Initially, they always did when primitives exceeded expectations, but eventually they'd review the footage. They'd see a human with improvised tools and pure determination matching their best technology, through sheer adaptability. They'd see what he'd seen, that advancement isn't measured purely in technology, but in the capacity to adapt, improvise and survive against impossible odds. And they'd realize, far too late, that the Galactic Collective had just made first contact with a species that would never ever accept being underestimated again. The galaxy had 12,000 years of refinement, structure and established order. Humanity had duct tape, spite, and a profound unwillingness to stay in anyone's predetermined box. Vian suspected he knew which would prove more dangerous in the long run. His money wasn't on the side with better technology,